Welcome back, guys, and today's video is going to cover something that I get a lot of questions about in the comments over the course of my franchise videos. So as I enter season 3 of the River Hogs franchise and also begin the Flyer series, I wanted to make a separate video showing all of my sliders and settings that I use so that I could not only easily link this rather than a timestamp in my preseason video like I did last season, but also so that I could get a little bit more in depth on certain changes and explain why certain things are the way they are. These sliders are going to be what I'm using throughout the entirety of my River Hogs season as well as my Flyer series. I don't like changing sliders in the middle of the season unless it's absolutely necessary, and with Madden 19 reaching the end of its patch cycle here soon, I wouldn't anticipate any changes to these until season 4 of the River Hogs franchise. So I'm going to start here with the most important ones, or at least the one people are going to care the most about, and that is gameplay sliders, and we're going to be starting on the player side. Quarterback accuracy is at 45, and this is actually down 5 from last season, and this was something I debated a lot about actually doing because on 50 I was getting very realistic completion percentages and things felt good, and then from my testing on 45 I was seeing a lot more of those extremely wild and inconsistent throws. But with some of the changes I made to the CPU and toning their offense down, I felt like I also needed to tone my offensive ability back a bit as well, so that's why this change was made. Pass blocking at 75 seems really high, but on all Madden it doesn't really matter. If the CPU wants to sack you, they're going to sack you, and with the way things are with getting sucked into sacks and line play as a whole just being so ridiculously bad, you're still likely to have your frustrations with getting sacked even with the setting this high. Wide receiver catching and run blocking both at 50. Catching is something I never really changed just because it always felt good enough. I see my guys make catches in traffic and with contact enough to feel good about where it's at. Part of that could be playing with guys like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, but it's not something that's stuck out to me where I feel like every time there's contact, my guys are dropping the ball or my guys are just outright dropping passes. For run blocking, I actually had this at 60 in season 1 and had extremely good success running the ball, so I bumped it back to 50 last season, and that's where it's going to stay. And I had a good balance of decent running games and games where the running game felt a lot more grindy, so that's why there's no changes there. Fumbles at 70 is to try and limit the amount of quote fumble animations of doom as well as hit stick fumbles. I don't think this slider actually helps with that quarterback fumble animation, as that just seems to be the answer to throwing a pass with a defender within 5 yards of your quarterback, but this does help with the hit stick fumbles that you usually have no way to avoid, but as you saw in the AFC Championship game, those will definitely still happen. I'm going to group up pass defense, reaction time, interceptions, and pass coverage into one here. Reaction time and coverage are both at 50, mainly because I'm so unsure that they actually do anything that I'm not going to waste my time even messing with them. Interceptions is down to 20 this season after being at 25 last season because I've led the league in picks 2 years in a row now, but a lot of that has to do with how stupid AI QBs can be at times, so you basically have to come to a decision where you either get 5 picks every other game or drop a lot of picks, and I'd much rather just drop a lot of picks. Tackling is at 45, and this was initially to help the CPU's running game when they couldn't run the ball at all, but that's not really an issue anymore, but I still really like the feel of it at 45. You'll see a bit more broken tackles, but nothing too crazy, and guys like Fournette or Marshawn Lynch will feel tougher to bring down, which is nice. Moving to the CPU side of things, quarterback accuracy is going to be the biggest change moving forward as it goes from 40 down to 20. Now, I'm not usually one to make that drastic of a change, especially when I'm getting good games, but this has always been one of my main pain points with Madden, and that's the efficiency of quarterbacks. This past season of my River Hogs franchise, computer quarterbacks completed over 70% of their passes, including 8 games where they were over 75%, and in the 2 games I played Blake Bortles this past season, he was a total of 43 of 53 passing, and that kind of efficiency is something that's just too high in my opinion. I also had an eye-opening experience with this slider where I actually turned it all the way down to 0 in my test CFM, and Tyrod Taylor started the game 7 of 7 and was dropping dimes all over the field, which is part of the reason it's been dropped so severely. I want a slightly more defensive game on both sides, which is why I also turned mine down. I don't enjoy playing these 56-38 games or these games that are 27-20 at halftime because there's no defense. Those games have their place, but I'd like to see them be fewer and farther between, so this is a change to try and move more in that direction. Pass blocking is down to 45 from 50, and this kind of goes back to what I just mentioned. I want pressure to be able to get there a little bit faster so that it can maybe create more inaccuracies or throws under pressure, and then I'd also like to try and eliminate some of those moments where the quarterback has 8 seconds of in the pocket without moving because all my defenders are locked up playing Save the Last Dance with offensive linemen. If sacks become too much of an issue this season though, then I'll just bump it back up to 50, but we're going to have to wait and see how it goes. Similar thing for run blocking here as we go from 65 down to 55. In my first season, the CPU couldn't really run the ball for anything. Part of that was the ball carrier issues, and then part of that was the CPU blocking just being terrible. But in one of the patches, run blocking and specifically blocks being held got a significant boost, and I still had CPU run blocking at 65, and what that resulted in was a ton of runs where I'd basically call it Tecmo Super Bowl blocking, where once the blocker gets his hands on a defender, they're locked up and they're not going anywhere. And I was constantly seeing runs where the back would get well into the secondary without a defender even being close until he reached the safeties, and that resulted in the CPU averaging over 6 yards per carry in my most recent season, which is just insane. So this was a move to try and rein that in a little bit and make things more realistic. Fumbles at 50 I think is in a good spot. In my first season I barely had any, but last season I actually had more than a few, and having that fluctuation is what I like to see, so that's good there. So again here I'm going to group up the passing sliders together because it's basically the same explanation for the CPU side. I have no confidence in reaction time or pass coverage actually doing anything or what they might actually do, so I just leave them alone. And then interceptions is at 30 to reduce the amount of ridiculous interceptions that can occur. With the way DBs warp to the ball and linebackers can pick off balls thrown to receivers 20 yards behind them, this number has to be low. The frequency that defenders are able to try and catch balls is just disproportionately high compared to real life, so again, that's why this number is so low. And then lastly, for tackling, same thing as for the user. For the most part, tackling seems to be a pretty sure thing, so this adds some variance without getting too crazy. I also think but can't confirm that this helps with the amount of hit sticks you might see, but like I said, I don't know if that's actually true or not, but I like the feel of it at 45. Moving on though, the next thing I'm going to talk about is penalty sliders, because there is significant changes here to what I had been playing on as well. Last season these were all over the place, but I decided to just move them all back to default. Now, I've never been someone who's been much of a believer in these having any effect on gameplay outside of the frequency of penalties, but in my test CFM, when I turned these all back to default, I did start seeing things that I hadn't seen, and most of it had to do with the defense. One of my biggest issues has been that it always felt like my defenders weren't in a position to make a play on the ball or even have interactions with wide receivers because they were so far away. But since changing these, I have noticed that happening more. I don't know if that's just by chance or not, or if having defensive holding and pass interference at 75 was causing that, but it was something that I feel like I immediately noticed. So while the simulation player in me dies a little bit inside at the lack of penalties that are going to happen, the reality is that these sliders don't really work anyway. So if there was in fact any effect on gameplay, we're just going to eliminate that completely and leave these on default. Getting now to some of the league settings I use: skill level all Madden, game speed normal, game style simulation. All of this is really personal preference, but if you use these sliders with something different, you're likely going to get a different experience. Player progression frequency is set to the end of the season, and I just like this model better for progression. It keeps things stable during the season as well as gives me something to look forward to once the season is over, and then overall I just think it's more realistic. Quarter length 15 minutes with accelerated clock set to 15-second runoff. This is something that has a wide variety of variations that you can have to get the same results, but if you're looking to get a realistic amount of plays, this should get you very close. This past season I averaged around 127 plays per game, and the real NFL number was 125.8, so very, very close. I do have weekly training set to auto, which is for a couple of different reasons. One, I just don't want to do it, and then two, I want to be on an even keel with the CPU, and I'm fairly certain that they just get bronze every week, so if that's the case, that's what I want as well. Moving along to game options, the main one here is injuries, which I have at 20, and that will be unchanged from season 1 and season 2. In season 1, I got hit kind of hard where I lost Patrick Mahomes and Kareem Hunt, but this past season, I pretty much went the entire regular season without anything serious at all. Sammy Watkins went down towards the end of the year, and then in the playoff game, I did lose both running backs, but those were the only serious injuries I suffered all year long, so I think it's in a good spot and there's good fluctuation there. Fatigue is something that I don't really mess with. I feel like it's fine where it's at. Same with speed threshold. I know in one of the patches this year, they changed how it worked, where I think 75 now is the old 50, but to be honest, I didn't notice anything different and have been on 50 the whole time, and I like where that's at. Gameplay helpers is just personal preference, so if you want to turn these on, go right ahead. I always use auto flip play call, but for everything else, I have it on manual or off, but but again, this is entirely personal preference, so use whatever you enjoy most. And then at the bottom there for the coin toss, I have receive as the first choice and with win for the second choice. And I've said this multiple times before, but the reason behind that is that the CPU is defaulted to have receive as their first choice. So if I change mine to kick, the CPU will get the ball first every single game because either they choose to receive or I choose to kick. So this allows for some variance there. Lastly, here are the XP sliders I'll be using, and I can't take any credit for these. All credit goes to TDawg. I've been using these for 2 seasons now for the River Hogs franchise, as well as multiple test seasons, and they've worked really well. I think what they're pretty much based on is the idea of having over the course of multiple seasons the same ratio or baseline of how players are rated that you start with, so that over time you don't end up in scenarios where the top running back in the league is an 81 overall or you have 25 90 plus rated quarterbacks. But like I said, these have worked really well for me and I'm happy with them. I'll link the Operation Sports thread in the description, so if you want to take a deeper look at what goes into them, you can. But I think that pretty much covers everything. One thing that I do want to clarify is that these settings definitely aren't going to be a cure-all for your Madden woes. They might help, but the chances are if you think Madden is garbage before using these, you're probably going to still think it's garbage after using these. Also, everybody's skill level and the way they play is different, so while these have been working well for me, they might not work at all for you, and I can't even really promise that they'll improve your experience. But my hope is that they can improve your experience, or at least provide a baseline to work with where you can tweak things more to your skill level or liking. But that's going to do it here. If I missed anything or you guys want to know more or any other settings that I'm using, just let me know in the comments. Hope you guys enjoyed the video or at least got something out of it. As always, I appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in, and until next time, thanks for watching.